6 months ago, my girlfriend Marie and I decided to get out of the house for once and go to the beach. We had both allowed bong hits and Skyrim to eat away at our lives for far too long. We both had Mondays off because of our schedule working at a hospital, and that particular Monday it was supposed to be bright and clear out, so we planned on watching the sunrise. In West Palm Beach, Florida, the beaches are beautiful ghost towns during the week to begin with, but Marie had heard of a secluded beach sitting in front of a vacant line of homes on Palm Beach Island. It had been years since I had been to the beach, but dating Marie had altered our lives for better and worse, and one of the worst parts is that we both enabled each other to sit at home every day and night and smoke pot. I had only dated 2 other girls, so I thought she was heaven sent. I committed myself to cleaning up my act and planned out the day so that we wouldn't have excuses not to go. I knew of a parking lot close enough to it, and the police generally ignored the beaches during the day, so we grabbed some Cuban sandwiches from Havana's, the most popular place for them, and headed off. I remember the beach being absolutely beautiful that day. We hiked for a bit from our parking lot and passed the home she knew to be safe, a gigantic Spanish mansion that was locally famous and built during Henry Flagler's era of obsession with Spanish Moorish inspired architecture. I was briefly tempted to check out one of the massive turrets and began to ascend one of their stairs, but sunrise was almost starting, and Marie had announced that she was excited as she ran ahead of me. When I got past the dense wall of green palms to the water, violent ribbons of pink, orange, and blue had exploded from the horizon, turning the water the neon hues of the sky and making the beach look like a vaporwave album cover. The water was almost perfectly serene, and it looked like an unfinished area of a video game, just a sheer surface of impossible colors. But Marie didn't seem interested in that. She was standing waist deep in the water, staring down with a concerned look on her face. Even at that point in the morning, the water was utterly transparent, allowing me to see crystalline-looking fish darting about far past her, but I couldn't see what she was staring at. "Babe, come check this out." A mildly frightened tone had entered her voice. I swam out to her, no longer aware of the blissful shades of purple, pink, and turquoise the colors of the sunrise were rapidly adjusting to. When I got to her, I stubbed my toe on something sharp. It was still somewhat dark out, but I couldn't really make out what had cut my toe open. The water shifted in colors like a gemstone with a million facets, making it impossible to see any kind of outline. After cursing for a bit, I carefully bent down to feel for the mystery object. Marie drifted away and asked for me to follow. I pulled my hand back when I felt something hard and shockingly cold. Whatever it was blended into the crystalline shades reflected from the sky, and I figured it was probably glass, so I told Marie that we should probably head to shore, in case there were shards in the water. But I didn't hear a response. I looked over to where I had last heard her voice, and saw a little cloud of scarlet filling a small part of the water, right below her bikini top, which she had discarded. Her bikini top was floating near a small pale thing that I couldn't quite make out. "Marie?" I asked the water nervously. The moment I turned around to the house to see if she had gone to shore, the water near the scarlet cloud erupted with a cloud of scarlet, and Marie's screams. Her body seemed to emerge from the gem-like water as if it had previously been hidden by a video editing effect, firing out whole and suddenly, including plumes of CGI blood. She didn't even manage to get the word help out. But I'll never forget the sound of her voice and the look on her face as she seemed to attempt to paddle towards me. She managed to get about 2 strokes in, when suddenly her legs disappeared again, and the water behind her was suddenly clear. The look on her face was one of shock, but she suddenly went limp, her face turning to face the sky, as red blossomed out from the bottom of her torso into the water. Then, there was a sudden disturbance in the water, as if there were fish behind her. What was left of my beautiful girlfriend was then pulled below the surface. I'd like to say that it happened too quickly for me to do anything, and it probably did. The reality is, I was so shocked by what I saw. I didn't move at all. I just stood there. I even called out her name again, as if what I had just seen was some kind of amazing practical joke. It wasn't until the water clearly began to move again, this time towards me, that I freaked out and began to scream and paddle. And it was towards the shoreline and not the area where a thick cloud of blood hung below a bikini top and a small pale thing. This is the first thing I think about when I take my first drink of Jack Daniels every morning. I got out of the water and whatever was chasing me did an about face, turning back sharply the moment my feet were on dry land. I called the police right away, and didn't move until they got there. They didn't believe a word of my story, and after a pretty long time at the station, only let me go because they had no idea how Marie died. It turned out the pale thing floating in the water had been her foot, severed so cleanly that the police had thought perhaps I had stolen surgical equipment, so we knew she was dead at that point. I was the only suspect, and at first, they thought I had just ditched her foot there. But apparently, some neighbor lady had called the police already complaining about the two of us. This is the only reason I'm a free man today, because she told them she saw her from down the beach scream and get pulled under, but that I wasn't near her at the time. The police didn't even seem interested in the case after that, and I was told that it was probably a riptide. They seemed to ignore her severed foot and my memory of her being cut in half. That was all 6 months ago. Apparently, I should inform the police if I'm planning on going out of town or anything. But aside from that, it seems that they've closed the case. But I haven't. I've talked to the old, hilariously rich woman who accidentally saved my life, Gertrude, at least a dozen times. At first, she seemed to be disgusted with me. Then she pitied me. And now, she seems to love having me over to tell stories to. I know everything about the architect of the home we passed through, Joseph Irons. He was an apprentice of Addison Meisner and Sherman Childs, the two men who had littered South Florida with beautiful architecture that had a style that was utterly distinct to Florida, combining elements of New England and Old World Spanish architecture into a new tropical fad that ran from the 1910s to the 1970s, waning only after the Kennedys slowly stopped visiting. He had died swimming right behind this very house, supposedly after getting caught in one of Florida's notorious riptides. In addition to Gertrude's admittedly amazing stories, I had taken up alcoholism and some occasionally harder drugs to deal with the changes in my life. After her parents made it clear that they thought I had killed her and didn't want to see me at the funeral, I had taken a hard turn south in life. I became obsessed with the myriad of strange deaths along the coast. A man had claimed that his wife had been skinned by angry natives after she found a strange mask in her multi-million-dollar Palm Beach home. A young girl who had been missing for weeks had been found dissected near the Flagler mansion, but rumor had it that her body had not decomposed or shown any signs of being frozen, and was warm to the touch when her weeping parents finally held her belated funeral. Gertrude had known that the currents were suspiciously dangerous along the home Marie and I had walked through, but there had never been any deaths, even at their directly adjacent neighbors' beaches. I began to get wasted with a guy named Paul, who didn't dodge a pee test at work and got fired. Paulie had taken to stealing from his neighbors, and even his family to keep his habits going. Opiates are a nightmare. Everyone in Florida knows that. So when he had to crash on my couch after getting kicked out of his mom's, I didn't give him a hard time about it. I grabbed some roxicodone that had been placed in a bin to be destroyed for him the day after he moved in, and he's been a relatively grateful friend ever since. I'll admit, he did help me through some hard spots too, even if he did steal my credit card once. I haven't been able to sleep right since it happened, and the amount of alcohol it takes to go to sleep at night had been getting larger every week. One night, about 2 months ago, I had a horrible nightmare where Marie and I were at the beach again. We were kissing in the water as it scintillated to reflect the ever-changing sunrise, when suddenly she cried out in surprise. We both looked down and there was a giant cloud of blood where her legs had been. She snapped back, as if pulled on a leash, and disappeared below the surface without a noise. I screamed in rage, and this time, I began to paddle. I ducked under the water and I saw something that looked like an arm flail out, but suddenly stopped when I ran into something hard and ice cold in the water. I knew then that it was the glass or whatever that I had cut my toe on that day. Under the water, I saw a face move in the crystal ocean, and I knew that whatever it was laughing at me. I had no idea what it was, and it had ruined my life. Every day I had given it rent-free in my own head, turning every thought what it did to Marie, and how that had messed up my life. Whatever it was, I knew when I came to that it thought it was funny. I woke up in a cold sweat, and went jogging for the first time in my entire life 30 minutes later. The next day, I didn't remember the nightmare, but I was still covered in cold sweat, and I still went jogging. Push-ups and sit-ups followed that, and within 2 weeks, I had suddenly cut my drinking habit. After another month, about 2 weeks ago, I even started going to the community pool to swim. It scared the hell out of me so badly that I called in sick to work and took some of Polly's treasured Xanax when I got home. But I kept doing it. I was swimming harder and faster. First once, then twice every day. Finally, I went to Home Depot and bought some heavy gloves and an electric chisel that apparently works underwater. Last week, I told Paulie that I wanted to go to the beach again. I didn't tell him which one, and he wasn't familiar enough with the area to figure it out. He had owed me enough to buy a car at this point, and I had taken care of him like a doting parent for the months he had spent on my couch. I had some extra roxicodone, and made sure he knew that it would be available once we got there. And that was all I needed to get him to start talking about how much he wanted to go to the beach lately. I made sure he didn't have a big dose the night before, and we took off at about 5 in the morning, right before the sunrise starts over the water. Along the way, I tell him that I'm using the chisel to seal something moored underwater that I can easily sell, and give him the small pouch of drugs I had been harboring to make sure he didn't ask any other questions. We got out of the car and began to hike to the house. The streaks of light turquoise, vibrant pink, and bolts of purple began to march out of the horizon. When we reached the Iron's house, his mouth was hanging open, just slightly, but Polly was still keeping his words together at that point. Dude, it is awesome out. Like, you were totally right. Right? The water is perfectly clear. I didn't say much. I'm not a good liar. Why don't you enjoy these bad boys and go for a swim? I'm going to take care of that thing I told you about. I handed him the sandwich bag filled with the remaining pills. He took 2 more, making his total 6 that morning. An absolutely massive dose. Then he got in the water. The ocean was perfectly flat again, reflecting the lurid colors of the sky and the green foliage along the edge of the water like a mirror. I could see everything underwater from the beach. Even fish swimming about in the deep areas reflected glints of dazzling colors. He was having a ball while I put my gloves on and got the chisel ready. I figured there was no way I would have long. I got into the water and swam out to the approximate area where the big glass thing was when Maria and I visited the beach. At first, I began to freak out a bit because I couldn't find it. But as I began to swim back to shore and reconsider, my knee scraped against something hard and ice cold. Damn, I think something bit me. Polly looked down at his legs in shock and amazement, but couldn't seem to find the culprit. I pulled at what seemed like the round top to a large object under the water. Glad as hell that I was wearing protective gloves. It didn't budge at all, and I thought I would have to use the chisel to take part of it off, but it seemed to twist off like a top from its base when rotating the round surface. "Oh God, help! Help, oh!" was all I heard before Polly gurgled on his way under the water. I didn't bother to turn and look back, and swam like holy hell. All the exercise barely did any good at all, as I towed what seemed like a glass statue along the water, but a sudden tiny pseudo-wave gave me just enough push to reach the shore ahead of the smoothly coordinated turbulence that seemed to follow me, like the elegant wake of a determined alligator. I got to the shore safe and hooted loudly when both my feet were on the shore. I dropped the glass-like thing on the sand and took a deep breath, surveying the water. A massive cloud of red and what looked like a piece of red meat and some ribs floating about stood defiantly amongst the beauty, as if accusing me. Suddenly, something splashed just slightly near the shore. The thing hadn't swam back this time. "You want your dingy little statue back?" I angrily asked the water. Then I turned to the thing sitting in the sand. Sure enough, it was some kind of glass-like material, in the shape of what looked like a seal-like creature, with a large oval face and razor-sharp teeth. The glass wasn't smooth, but ragged and razor-sharp in areas, with sharp veins beneath the base that looked like glass made from a lightning strike. Later, on closer inspection, I came to the conclusion that it looked as if the shape had naturally formed from a lightning bolt, with the same telltale dense, opaque areas and roots made from electrical discharge that one can find on glass made this way. Its features are harsh and strangely natural looking. "Too bad you're not getting it back," I yelled out to the water. I took the chisel out of the holster I had placed over my trunks and turned it on. It hummed angrily, and whatever was in the water splashed desperately. When I put it to the surface of the creepy statue, it thumped a couple of times and then promptly produced the sound of metal tearing. The water calmed down, but I still didn't feel like giving it back. I called the cops again, knowing that they would be checking local cameras to see if Polly was driving with me to the beach, and got ready to avoid explaining myself. Thank God for nosy neighbors. It wasn't Gertrude this time, but sure enough, someone was watching from a nearby house and told the police they saw Polly go under. I told the cops he was a weird guy and wanted to see the spot where Marie went missing, despite the elderly, wealthy witness with no reason to lie. They clearly didn't believe me. They scheduled a time for me to meet with the federal prosecutor next week and go over the case with my attorney present. But for now, I'm a free man and it's this thing that's a prisoner. I haven't had a nightmare since. I took a picture of the thing and Gertrude said that it looked like some of the relics that Aes and the Jaga, who used to live in the area, left behind. And it's clearly a threatening looking Caribbean monk seal, which went extinct shortly after the Spaniards began to set up shop. I need to destroy this thing before I go to jail. I know they'll find an excuse, and frankly, after what I did to Polly, I deserve it. I just want to make sure that thing doesn't get its statue back. I've tried a hammer. I rented a jackhammer. I even covered it in lighter fluid and lit it up. It didn't even warm it. The thing was still cold enough to feel from a foot away. Tomorrow, I'm going to take this to a very odd friend of mine. This friend, who I met through Polly, has an unfortunate line of work. Thankfully, because of this, he doesn't ask questions and knew where to get a large amount of acid and a glass trough big enough for the statue. I'm going to do everything I can to destroy this thing before I get sent away. That thing will not get the last laugh. I was 16 when I saw the first crack, a jagged line about 4 feet long but less than an inch wide. I found it by the sidewalk behind my house, not on the sidewalk. The crack was in the air, visible from every direction as I circled around it, harmlessly suspended and nothing more. I couldn't touch it. My hands passed through it as though it wasn't there, although my hand was white and numb with cold by the time it reached the other side. I wouldn't even walk close to it. Something about the emptiness just rubbed me the wrong way. I've walked around caves, stared down holes, and even used a telescope to look at the space between stars. This wasn't like that. It felt less like something was missing and more like something extra that shouldn't be there. My family moved shortly after that, and I guess I forgot all about it for a while. Time moved steadily forward, except maybe for a few months after college when it stopped, to let me admire my future wife. She had the kind of smile that hinted at a secret, and if I had a guess, I'd say it was the secret to being happy. I would have given anything to explore every hidden crevice of her mind, knowing her as she knew herself, until one day, we could start making new secrets of our own. It was about a week after we met at work, when we both had to stay late to clean up after an office party. I asked her to come sit on the roof and look at the sky with me. There we were, side by side, the space between our hands burning like fire, the shape of her mouth illuminated with the backdrop of endless stars. gleaming like millions of envious eyes, wishing they could sit where I was sitting now. I didn't know anything could make me feel so weak. My legs were trembling, and I remember having to keep switching positions so she wouldn't notice. I didn't trust the words in my mouth or the thoughts in my brain, or any other part of me which was blurred out of existence, to make room for my appreciation of everything that she was. That's when I saw the crack again, and I was reminded how powerful weakness could be. It was large now, running along the side of an external AC unit, not quite alongside. If I really looked, I could see the empty air between the metal box and the crack. I could just make out the little streaks of light, where the surrounding stars bled their light into the hole to be lost forever. A cookie-cutter gap in reality that the world had forgotten to fill in. "You can leave whenever you want," she said. I guess she noticed that I was distracted. I shook my head, prompting her fingers to trace their way up my hand. I turned to her and her breath warmed against my mouth. And suddenly, that was the only thing in the world. 6 months and we were engaged. Another year and we were married. Neither of us stayed long at that office, and I never went back up to that roof. The crack didn't matter. Bad dreams can't hurt you once you've woken up. And beside her grace, I was awake for the very first time. Things went well for us, but we were so in love that I don't think we would have noticed if they hadn't. I got an investment banking job and climbed the corporate ladder. I started seeing more cracks, but no one else seemed to notice, so I didn't mention them either. Sometimes they'd align perfectly to an existing object, but I could feel their emptiness pulling at me, and I knew what they really were. There was a big one above the conference table at work, but I had a future here and I wouldn't let something like that get in the way of my success. My diligence paid off when my boss finally told me that he was getting older and wanted me as a partner for the firm. He was standing right on the other side of the crack when he said it, so it was difficult to maintain eye contact with him. "Unless that isn't something you want," he said, misreading my silence. "Of course you can leave whenever you want." The same words, but I didn't recognize the significance yet. I just smiled and shook his hand, careful to reach underneath the crack hanging between us. It was another dream come true, and I was the king of the world. My wife and I moved into a big house, and we had a baby girl together. I watched her grow, and I watched the cracks grow with her. Hairline fractures splintered the sky and mapped their web through the air. I had to be careful where I was walking. There would be a dozen of them in my path within any given day. I passed through a big one in my car once. I was changing lanes and didn't notice in time. The crack went straight through my windshield without disturbing the glass, passing through my heart and out the other side. Cold doesn't even begin to describe it. The line erased my body as it passed through me, displacing skin and organs, leaving a sucking, vacuous wound for the briefest instant before it was gone. I lurched for the wheel and spun off the road into the guardrail. My hands kept racing over my chest, fists pounding against solid skin to reassure myself that I was whole. I started working from home after that. There's a bathroom that doesn't have any cracks in it, and I spend most of my time in there. I've seen my wife and daughter walk straight through them, without the slightest notice. I can't explain to them what I see and feel, because I know they'll think I'm crazy, and maybe I am. But that doesn't change anything. I'll sit in here for hours at a time, working on my laptop or reading a book, loathing to leave where I might stumble through what isn't there. My wife begged me to leave, and sometimes I'd open the door just to walk around the house or sit with her in the living room. But I couldn't go outside anymore. There were too many of them. More every day it seemed like. The world around me had shattered, and I was the only one to notice. I know it hurt her, but in time, my wife accepted that this is how life was going to be. She made the best of it, always inviting friends or family here and making excuses when I was expected somewhere else. She took cooking classes and learned how to make all my favorite meals, even getting a small table and television installed in the bathroom I was confined in. My daughter was a different story. 8 years old now, and no amount of explaining could make her understand how much I loved her, even if I wasn't always there. I didn't know how embarrassed she was of me, until a teacher called to let me know she'd been telling her friends that I was dead. I made an effort to sit with her in the kitchen, to ask her why she would do that, but all she said is that I might as well be. And she was right. I wasn't taking care of my family anymore. They had enough money put away that they didn't need me to work. I was just a burden. And just like the cracks, I was growing bigger every day. Some nights, I wouldn't leave the bathroom to go to bed, and I could hear my wife crying through the wall between us. I tried to push myself harder, willing myself through the emptiness. It wasn't any good. They cut through me like a knife, froze me to my core, shredding bone and sinew, and stitching me back together so seamlessly that there was nothing but the memory of that pain to remind me of my torment. I was ready for this to be over. I just didn't know it until I heard the words out of my daughter's mouth as she pressed against the other side of the bathroom door. "You can leave whenever you want." "Yes," I told her. "I'm ready." "All you have to do is throw yourself into a big one," she said. "You'll be out." She knew about them? I jumped up and flung the door open. She wasn't there. I raced down the hall, shouting her name, forcing myself through each searing darkness that severed my mind and body, heart and soul. There she was, standing outside next to the biggest abyss I had ever seen. A wall of darkness, 10 feet across and ripping through the air above like a skyscraper. I could feel the call of that emptiness, whispering to me, beckoning me, a promise of freedom and release that a lifetime of memories could not dissuade. "Just do it already, you've been here long enough," she said. But I was afraid. Even this far away from the blackness, I could remember how those dark talons would feel as they ran through my body. Would there be anything left of me to come out the other side? It was big enough that I didn't have to come out at all. I could step in and be gone. It's what my daughter wanted. So did my wife. If only she had the courage to admit it. And maybe it's what I wanted too. But on my knees before all of creation and its antithesis, I was afraid. "It's easy, just follow me." I tried to stop her, air dragging through my lungs, feet stumbling and twisting beneath me. A lunging, desperate grab. I tried to stop her from entering that blackness, but she was gone, and there was no choice but to follow. Into the looming void I plunged, screaming without sound, bleeding without wounds, disintegrating into nothing. And then, I opened my eyes. I was reclining in a padded chair like they have at the dentist office. 3 men were standing over me. A plethora of beeping machines, IV lines, and heart rate monitors, cluttered the room to either side. "Well?" one of the men asked. "How was it? You were out for almost an hour." I couldn't answer. There was nothing left of me to answer. "We kept sending signals telling you it was okay to leave," another man said. "Didn't you get them?" I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. Life 2.0 still has some bugs, but they told me that they figured out how to fix most of the cracks if I wanted to go again. "It's going to be ready for the market soon," they said. "People are going to love it." "Did you notice anything else that needs fixing?" they asked. "Just in this world," I replied. I was tasked with cleaning up my grandmother's house after her passing, my parents having become estranged from her years before I was born, my mother having been her only child, and her own siblings passing away many years ago. I was the only one to volunteer to do the process. My own contact with my grandmother had been limited, but nice. My parents permitting her to see me once when I was born, and allowing letters to be exchanged between the two of us. They were your standard, speaking to a relative you know little about kind of letters. Short, courteous, and surface level. Despite this, I had a sort of fondness of this woman I had never truly met. My parents refused to speak much of her, so cleaning the house had become an opportunity to get to know her. The house itself was nothing remarkable. A comfortable one-story home similar to those of the surrounding area. Located in a small retirement town, filled mostly with old folks and occasionally small families, wishing to take advantage of the cheap house prices. It was a fine area, if not a tad bit boring. Quiet and unassuming, just like the house from outside. Entering was a different story. It soon became apparent that my grandmother was a hoarder. Piles and piles of stuff lining every wall. A twisting turning path between the items. The only way it seemed one could get around the place. No wonder why my folks had declined to come with me. I had taken some time walking around the small home before I decided to start cleaning, trying to grasp a lay of the land and the easiest way to begin the process of sorting all of the hoard. Doing this, however, led me to a room that had been locked. A room I hadn't been informed of when the lawyer had given me the house keys. I pulled them out, flipping through them, trying them all out on the door. One finally shoved into the lock, clicking when I turned it. I was in. The room seemed completely different than the rest of the house. For one, there were no signs of hoarding. Instead, it was as neat as could be, despite there being a thick layer of dust across every surface. It clearly hadn't been touched since it was last used, which, considering as this was obviously my mother's old bedroom, it wouldn't have been touched since the 60s. She had left home at 16. It was one of the few things that she had told me about her past. This made the discovery of the room even more exciting to me. Finally, I could learn more about my grandmother and my mother. The mystery of our family would begin to unravel in this room. Most of the room was fairly uninteresting. A few Barbie dolls I made a mental note to Google to see if they were worth anything, as well as some clothes and old records that caught my eye. Wait till I showed my friends the old The Mamas and the Papas and the Yardbirds album I had found. The thing that caught my attention the most, however, was a plain-looking journal with weathered yellow pages. I immediately grabbed it and shoved it in my coat pocket, filing it away for later inspection. I had to actually start cleaning if I wanted to get anywhere in this massive hoard. That brings me today, a free day off from my working and cleaning. I actually decided to sit down and read what was in this journal. I think I regret it. Well, no, actually, I don't. It explained a lot. Why my mother had left. Why she was only permitted to see me once. Why my family secrets were kept hush-hush. My grandmother was a murderer. Instead of me explaining the story, I'll let my mother's own words do the talking. For brevity, I will admit entries that don't have much to do with the secret. January 15th, 1965. Dear Diary, Maurice came around again today. He has been checking up on me a lot lately, ever since my father left. I suppose I appreciate it. Mother has not left her room since the incident, and I am unable to look after little Mary on my own. She is so tiny. I wonder if I was that small as a baby. Poor thing. Even looking at her, you can see the genes of the mailman. I should not know this, and you and Maurice are the only two I have told. But Mother cheated on Father with the mailman. It is why he left, though Mother will not say a word about it to me. I mean, it makes sense. Who would want their own daughter knowing about their infidelity? I certainly would not. Maurice is talking of marriage. He says it is legal now, if we attain the court's approval. Then, I can finally leave this wretched home of mine. Things were strained before Father left. Now I'm afraid of what will happen. Mother usually is not this bad. She has had episodes before, when Father came home drunk late after work, and they would argue, and then she wouldn't speak for a couple of days, but it would always go away. Father would bring home flowers. They would kiss and make up. It has been 2 weeks since my mother spoke. She will sometimes leave her room to eat and use the loo, but that's about it. I am worried. School returns soon. What will happen when I leave little Mary home all day? Will Mother even think to tend to her? I tense up at the thought. Writing again soon. Anne. January 16th, 1965. Dear Diary, I saw something strange this morning. I got up in the middle of the night for a glass of water and decided to check in on little Mary as I often do at night. She is the reason for my terrible sleep schedule, but oh well. Anyway, I went to check on her. She sleeps in what used to be my father's study, in her makeshift bedroom, but I guess it is just her bedroom now. The door was slightly ajar. Usually, I keep it fully shut, making the room nice and warm for her. A trick Granny taught me. I peeped in. Something told me I should not make any sudden or loud noises when I did so. My gut instinct was probably correct. Mother was in there. She was standing over the cot, watching down at little Mary. She was dead still. If it was not for the faint moving of her stomach up and down, it would be as if she was dead on her feet. That was not the worst part of things, however. That was Mother's face. Her eyes were blank, but her mouth was twisted up into a grin. It looked so perverse. I am truly scared. What is wrong with my mother? I'll write again soon. Anne. January 20th, 1965. Dear Diary, today I returned to school. I have been observing Mother every night for the past couple of days. She has been doing the exact same thing as I saw the morning of the 16th, standing and staring at little Mary. I told Maurice about my concerns. He hopes to start the procedure for us to marry soon. I will write again when I come home from school. Dear Diary, I write this locked in my room. I'm going to sneak out the window to ride with Maurice to live with him and his parents. The most terrible thing has just happened. Unfortunately, little Mary is dead. Mother has killed her. Oh, it was horrific. I had entered home from school. I was excited actually. I could hear Mother whistling. She was in the kitchen rather than her room. I thought this would be good news. Oh, I had hoped it would be good news. She always whistled when she was feeling happy. Oh dear Lord. The scene that I walked into. When I close my eyes, I can still see it now. Mother with the knife she used to prepare large poultry. Mary on the chopping board. Her lifeless body was so pale, so limp. My mother has gone crazy. I could see the roasting dish behind her, and the blood. There was so much blood. Blood all over my mother, staining the white skin of Mary. Her limbs. She had chopped her limbs. Oh God, dear God. I hate to think what is happening in my home. No, not my home. Never again my home. That house. That hell house. God, I cannot continue to think about it. This is truly it. I will not be writing in you again, diary. And that was it. My mother kept to her promise. She never wrote in the diary again. And from what little I was told, her and father married days after this. I suppose the court would approve of a marriage that took my mother far, far away from what happened. The red stains in my grandmother's kitchen make sense now. It started with the parrot. This was supposed to be a fun family trip for my little cousin's birthday. She just turned 3 and loved animals, so the zoo seemed like the perfect place. I wasn't all that fascinated by wildlife, to be honest, so I mostly stayed on my phone while my cousin and little brother goggled at everything. Look, Zara, see the pretty birds? My uncle lifted Zara onto his shoulders, and she flailed her arms. Paki! Zara replied excitedly. That's the Bengali word for bird. Yeah, see? Those are macaws. This one has giant parrots. My brother hopped over to the next enclosure and gazed inside. A few parrots were perched together on a giant branch. Most were squawking, some were even saying English words. Most likely stuff they'd picked up from the human guests. Hi, squawked one. Zareth, my brother, laughed. Hi there. The parrot went on. Another one said hello. A third one piped up with bye-bye. It amused me enough to make me put my phone away. I moved closer to Zareth and ruffled his hair. Wonder if they can say our names. Yeah. Hey, can you say Zareth? A series of squawks and the same few words came back in response. Zareth rolled his eyes. Dumb birds. I rolled my eyes too. Did he actually think they'd start calling his name after he mentioned it once? 10-year-olds were so stupid and impatient. I looked around for my uncle and Zara. They were over by the peacocks. Zara squealing at one in delight because it had all of its feathers spread out. I was about to walk over to them when a new word reached my ears. Help! I turned around. The parrots were still squawking away and repeating the same hellos and byes. For a second, I thought I'd imagined it. But it came again. Help! The bright green parrot on the smaller branch, right under the big one. I stared at it intently, as did Seraph. Help! Ha, what the heck? Seraph scratched his head. I bet that one saw someone getting murdered or something. Or getting kidnapped, or just... help! It was louder this time. Loud enough that it had turned a few heads over at the other enclosures too. A few people flocked closer to us, but it seemed like the parrot was done. It didn't repeat the word again. Ifis, Zareth, let's go. Uncle Faisal was calling. I grabbed Zareth's arm and dragged him over. Then we went to go look at the big cats. I half forgot about the weird parrot for a while. But then, these exhibits just got weirder. The lions were strange. I didn't notice anything odd at first. I did think it was a bit odd none of them were laying around, since as far as I knew, lions typically slept throughout the whole day. Not these ones, they were pacing around everywhere, like they had taxes to worry about or something. Zara toddled over to the glass barrier we were looking at the lions through. It's Simba, she murmured. I nodded. Yeah, Simba. Nala too, see? I lifted her up and pointed at the lioness. It seemed to notice me pointing and promptly walked over. Ah! Zara squealed. Big lion, it's gonna roar. Maybe. Probably not. Zareth tried to make roaring noises at it. Rawr, rawr. The lioness stared at him. I know the glass barrier was more than strong enough to keep them in, but something about the way it was looking made me pull my brother away. Dang, it's staring into my soul, look. Zareth knocked on the glass. Blink twice if you're secretly a demon staring into my soul. The lion didn't blink twice, but it did blink once. Zareth laughed. Ha, I'll take that as a no. Zara giggled. Zareth talking to Nala. I want to talk to Nala. I moved her closer to the glass so that she could see whatever she wanted. Zara giggled again. Hi, lion, she said brightly. Wanna come and play with me? The lion blinked twice. I didn't think anything of it initially, until Zareth popped up again. Blink twice if you want us to bust you out of there, so you can play with Zara. The lion blinked twice again. Zareth laughed and Zara squealed. But I was getting more and more uncomfortable. There was something odd about the way the lion was staring. Something in its eyes that didn't sit right with me. Sad, desperate-looking eyes. Like they were asking for help. You kids, don't knock on the glass. It's not allowed. A security guard shooed us away, and we obediently trotted back to Uncle Faisal. I stole one last glance at the lioness. It was looking after us, almost longingly. At the monkey enclosure, they all appeared to be the most miserable monkeys I'd ever come across. Not a single one was racing around. or swinging from the trees, all just sitting there silently, either fiddling with their arms or staring back at the humans goggling at them. After the monkey enclosure, we decided to go see the giraffes. They were fairly normal except for the fact that one or two seemed totally lost, as in they kept bumping their long necks into stuff and seemed to have trouble eating properly from high up leaves, like they weren't used to it. The reptile area was where Zareth had a field day. His favorite animals were snakes. But the knot in my stomach just got tighter after one of the snakes kept banging his head against the top of its tank. Another gecko kept jumping from one corner to another and making a strange digging motion with its tiny arms. A lizard tried to climb up the glass tank walls in vain and kept falling backwards. I told myself that they were just animals tired of being cooped up in tanks. And that was it, despite the fact that I had been to other zoos before, and animals don't act like this normally, and despite how utterly haunting the look in their eyes were. We were finally at the end of our little zoo journey, and I heaved a sigh of relief. The place was making me nauseous at this point. My uncle noticed a photo booth by the exit, and pointed it out excitedly. "Oh look, they've got a souvenir photo booth. Wanna take pictures?" I shook my head. I hated taking pictures. Zara hated them too, and she made it clear by letting out a loud shriek. "No!" Zareth, however, rose to the challenge. "Can I take some photos? Just me. I want to make some dumb faces and stuff." "Sure, kiddo." My uncle sent him off to the booth, and we waited next to it. Zareth emerged again a few minutes later, but he wasn't holding any photographs. I raised an eyebrow. "Where's the pics?" "Oh, in my pocket. Let's go, I'm hungry." I shrugged and followed him, happy to get out of this place. Of course, I hadn't yet noticed anything out of the ordinary. We were almost to the car when Zara piped up with the strangest question. "Where's Zareth?" We all stared at her, and she stared back. "I'm here." Zareth waved his arms. Zara only gazed at him for a moment, and then looked at me again. "Where's Zareth? Wanna play with Zareth?" "He's right here, kiddo. See?" My uncle tried to guide her towards Zareth, but she held on to me tightly instead. "Where's Zareth go?" she murmured, looking desolate now. She buried her head in my chest and shut her eyes. I patted her head and looked at my brother and uncle in confusion. Zareth only shrugged in a shake my head 3-year-olds kind of way, while my uncle scratched his head. "Perhaps she's playing a game or something. Thinks it's funny." I nodded. Seemed like a reasonable enough explanation. Well, not really. Zara had never done odd stuff like this. Sure, she had her three-nager moments, but something about her question didn't sit right with me. I briefly caught Zareth's eye. He was smiling slightly, or was it a smirk? He looked away immediately when he saw me staring, but it was too late. Uneasiness was setting into me. I tapped his shoulder while my uncle started the car. "Can I see those photos you took at the booth?" Zareth shoved his hands into his pockets. "Why?" Why not? You said you wanted to make funny faces. I want to laugh at them." "They're not that funny. Just show me the photos." "No, get in the car." I couldn't. Not until I got to the bottom of this. If he wasn't gonna show me the photos, there was one other way. Uncle Faisal, I'll be right back. Before he could say anything, I ran back towards the zoo, towards the photo booth. I don't know what I was expecting to find, if anything. But what the heck was going on? First, the animals here literally seemed to be haunted. And now my brother too? The way Zara had asked where Zareth was beyond unsettling. What did she mean by where is he? I reached the booth just as another family did too. I decided to let them go first. A mom, a dad, and their 2 kids. I idly stared at the macaw enclosure nearby while I waited, hoping they wouldn't take too long. They were all sitting next to each other on a big branch, occasionally cawing now and then. 5 macaws. I thought it was cute how they were all huddled up. I glanced at the booth. The dad and daughter were missing. I presumed they'd gone in to take their photo. I looked back at the macaw enclosure. I blinked. Huh? 7 macaws? No, that can't be right. There were 5 literally just a second ago. Did some zookeeper bolt inside the cage and put in 2 more? Alright guys, let's go. The dad and daughter were out again. The little boy was crying now, saying he wanted a photo too. So in he went with his mother, while the other 2 waited. The girl caught me staring at them, and I hurriedly looked away. What was that? I looked back again. I could have sworn she had an odd, glassy look in her eyes, and a hardly noticeable smirk on her face, similar to the one on Zareth. I shook my head. I was being weird and paranoid. What did I even think was happening? The animals earlier had probably just creeped me out. 9 macaws. I rubbed my eyes repeatedly and stared inside the cage. 9 macaws. No, there were 7. No, even that wasn't correct. There were 5. 5 macaws. There's no way someone could have just... Done. Let's go then. The family was leaving, looking normal as ever. Just as they exited, the girl turned to look at me. The same glassy, eerie look. It felt like she was challenging me with a question. Did you figure it out yet? Huh? Did ya? A family of 4. I glanced back at the cage, locking eyes with the 4 macaw additions that had appeared out of thin air, and a sinking feeling of dread settled into my chest. No, I whispered. The macaws only stared back, looking lost and desperate. Help us. Help. One of the macaws had flown straight towards me and was squawking repeatedly. Help, help, help. I didn't know how to help. I didn't even know where my brother was. Oh my god. Where was he? What the hell did he get turned into? My head started feeling fuzzy. A million awful scenarios running through. Trembling, I glanced around. A plethora of chirps, squawks, growls, and the occasional roars were sounding everywhere. Were they all just unsuspecting visitors, stuck forever in their new trapped, helpless forms? I heard my uncle call my name. Did you take the photos? Uncle Faisal was standing there, Zareth and Zara next to him. I tried to slow my breathing. Yes, let's go. There was nothing more I could do there. My brother, and who knows how many other people, were trapped inside this godforsaken zoo. Maybe forever. I looked at fake Zareth. What the hell even was he? What would I be sharing a room with now? Some kind of demonic entity? A body snatcher? I pulled Sarah away from him. He didn't seem to mind, just glanced at me briefly with the same glassy look and smirk, implicating, I'm your brother now, and you're never going to see him again. But yes, I will. If it was the last thing I did, I was going to go back to that zoo one day and get Zareth back. It appeared 2 weeks ago. A storm raged the night before, and the following morning it was there, taking up the entire middle of the West Valley and Jefferson intersection. A sinkhole that dropped so far no one could see how deep it went. There were no reports of any cracks forming prior to the ground opening up, and it was in the only corner of the country that didn't have any street cameras nearby. The discovery was called in around 6 a.m. by a contractor on his way to a job site. It was early and still raining, and he nearly drove right into the sinkhole. Within minutes, police officers and the fire department showed up, and the intersection was taped off. They had no idea what caused it and couldn't figure out what to do about it. The sinkhole apparently just kept going, so they couldn't fill it up, no matter how many cement trucks they sent in. The intersection became this interesting local wonder that turned into national news. Government specialists arrived with drones, GPSs, and radio transmitters, and all kinds of sonar tech. Everything they sent would drop down, going deeper and deeper, until a certain depth, where they would all go offline and were never seen again. No one had any real answers for what was happening, or plans to fix it. There was talk about building an artificial bottom a few feet down, that they could equal off at street level so the intersection could continue as is, but it never got past the planning stage. It didn't have the chance. Less than a week later, something unthinkable happened. Small groups of people began amassing near the constructed barriers around the sinkhole. One person, an older lady, walked out, away from her group, stepping over the edge and down into the abyss. She didn't scream or cry. She just went over and disappeared. There were gasps. A lone scream emerged as another person, this one, a teenage boy, followed the old woman's footsteps. Then another one followed him over, and then yet another. That day, close to 100 people climbed the barrier and walked over the edge. Even some guards left their posts and went over themselves. Our government instituted both a quarantine and a curfew for the city. The perimeter around the sinkhole grew. But again, it had no effect. People found a way in. They were from all parts of the city, and all walks of life. There was no separating the sheep from the goats, the wheat from the chaff. Whatever was happening, everyone was welcome. No one knew why people were doing it, but one afternoon while doom scrolling, I came across a video. It was from a cell phone and had gone viral. Normally, I wouldn't watch that type of thing, but I immediately recognized the subject. It was a woman named Helen. She was always pleasant, grateful, and enjoyable to be around. But watching her stand on the edge, she appeared to be a completely different person. It shook me to the core. Her expression hit a deep nerve in me. It was dark and visceral. She had a confused sadness, like a veil had been pulled aside to reveal a choice she'd always had available, but had now lost all care or semblance of a future, other than stepping forward. And then, she did. I'd never seen someone die before, and was disturbed that the first time doing so was someone I helped carry groceries for at the supermarket near my apartment, and knew on a first-name basis. I haven't gone back to the supermarket, though it's now apparent that whatever's going on isn't transmissible. Either you were affected by it or you weren't. And over the next 2 weeks, the deaths rose and then dropped off. We all thought that was it. We referred to those who had walked over the edge as the fallers, and tried to act like it was all some bizarre mass psychosis event. But they hadn't fallen. What they did was intentional, and whatever was happening wasn't finished. A week later, another strange anomaly occurred. People began complaining about a vague ringing sound, like a train coming to station far off in the distance. Not everyone heard it, but within a week, everyone in the city knew at least 5 people who did, and the number was growing every day. I remember when my girlfriend, Laura, first heard it. I thought she was messing with me, but the more she talked about it, the more I believed her. She described it as a single note, one that was rising and decaying simultaneously, like it was always getting quieter and louder, softer and harsher. The longer it occurred, the more uneasy she felt. The note would fluctuate from almost imperceptible to being so loud it was like that distant train was now right beside her. Sometimes at night, she said it was excruciating. I started to wonder about the other people who heard it. Did they have the same experience? Was it better or worse? I couldn't imagine it being worse. Then I remembered Christian. He was a guy in my dorm in college who was afflicted by the suicide disease. It was actually named Fothergill's disease, or trigeminal neuralgia. For him, it developed during first week, and by the end of the first year, Christian had dropped out. It was a condition that caused him insane amounts of unbearable pain in his face and temples, caused by sensation flare-ups in the nerves. The suffering was so great that many who are gripped by it take their own lives to escape. I'm not sure if he did. I was hopeful that wasn't some version of what was happening to Laura and the others. But if it was, how far would people go? Does it have to do with the storm that erupted that night? It's funny thinking back. My girlfriend's religious mother had called us during the storm, saying it felt biblical, and that was true. It did carry an apocalyptic vibe. I remember before the rain started, the air felt heavy. It wasn't just the humidity. It felt like gravity was shifting. Then it started to rain, droplets the size of golf balls. It continued through the night. Around 3 a.m., a slight tremor rippled through the city. It was faint, but even if you were asleep, you felt it. I'd gone to the bathroom and was doom scrolling when it happened. It felt like the earth had convulsed, gagged and vomited up something it couldn't ingest. The tremble never repeated, and the rain continued until the following morning. Just after breakfast, the sun came out like it was the first day of summer. But watching the heavy curtains of rainwater pouring through the streets and gutters evoked thoughts of Noah. Wasn't there a Bible verse about the earth opening its mouth and swallowing us up? Maybe that's paraphrasing. It's been a while since I've cracked the old book. Could it be extraterrestrials if they were out there and planning a takeover? Having us all walk into a giant trash can in the ground is a pretty genius idea. It would be an easy way to clear the planet of a population. Was the sinkhole created by some weapon that plunged into our Earth and sent out a resonance wave from the bottom that would be heard eventually by everyone and pull them down to its depths and to their death? It's frustrating listening to the talking heads on TV go on about it. They all sound sure of themselves, as do the scientists and experts that are supposedly fixing this. Calm breeds calm, I guess. I just wish people would be honest with the cold hard fact that we have no idea what's happening. And the longer it continues, the more I realize we probably never will. The history books may make something up to justify or explain, but it'll just be a guess. And that's assuming that there will still be people writing history books after this. Some scientists think it could be related to Earth's magnetic field, for something completely invisible that can be detected by a compass needle and reaches thousands of miles into space. I'm shocked they're only thinking of it now. Could certain electric currents carry imperceptible sound waves that cause psychological influence, physical manipulation? And was there a way to block the wave? Everyone seemed to have more and more questions, always framed in a positive light, like they were actually answers bringing us closer to the end of this whole thing. And maybe they were right in the wrong way. This morning, I found Laura in the bathroom. She had large red-stained bandages over both her ears. A pair of gory scissors sat in the blood-splattered sink. She'd punctured both her eardrums. The sound had become too much. The hospital was filled with people who had similar ideas. Bloody bandages over destroyed ears. They were all trying to make the sound stop, but it didn't work. The first night back from the hospital, Laura couldn't sleep. She took a few Ambien, a pint of whiskey, and some Oxys, but nothing worked. She was curled up in the fetal position, holding her head at both sides. We both finally fell asleep, I think, but when I woke up, Laura was gone. We had a small pad and paper that she was using to communicate with me. She'd written down, "I'm sorry. I can't take it. Love you forever." Cameras had been set up at the sinkhole to try and identify the people who were going over the edge. They used facial identifying software to determine the individual and contact the next of kin. I didn't want to wait. I had to go to a central control station on the outskirts of town to find out if she'd gone in. It took several hours as that morning was apparently busy. A few thousand people had gone over, and it was only getting worse. Then Laura's name and face came up on the monitor. She'd gone over. Just before dawn of that morning was what the surveillance report said. I was told I could put her picture up on the wall outside if I wanted. I decided against it. As I left, I walked past the thousands of photographs and visuals that plastered the makeshift memorial for the fallers. I'm glad I didn't ask for a photo. There was no room left, and I would have had to cover someone else's. So many people. How did this happen? I searched for... So many people. How did this happen? I searched for answers again, thinking back to college. I remember a professor showing a video about anthill death spirals. It only occurred in certain types of army ants. But when a group would get separated from the main swarm, they'd lose the pheromone track, panic, and follow one another's scent in a continuous rotating circle. Hundreds, thousands, sometimes millions of ants would do this, until they'd all die of exhaustion. I heard sinkholes have appeared in New York, Hong Kong, and Moscow now. Was this the beginning of our final death spiral? Then the ringing trailed off, as did the deaths, and for the briefest of time, it seemed like it was all ending. But I saw them everywhere. Every morning, looking down into my mug of black coffee, I was putting cream in just to avoid the reminder during every sip. It didn't matter. I saw it in the blacks of people's eyes, the hubcaps of car wheels, the traffic lights that weren't lit. The sinkhole was every circle I came across, day and night. Then the dreams started. I'd always be walking with Laura, somewhere downtown, when the rain would start. Then the ground below us would shake. The building beside us would collapse. She'd run into the middle of the street, and I'd chase after her. Just as I was about to get to her, the cement under us crumbled away, and the intersection would collapse. We'd both fall, large chunks of cement crushing us as we reached out for each other. It was always at this point I realized I was dreaming, but I couldn't wake up. We'd just keep falling, and Laura would be there, in pain, just out of reach. I heard people talk about falling in their dreams, and how they always wake up before they land. I've always wondered why that is. Is it because since dreams are projections of our consciousness, and we don't know what happens after death, our brains just don't know what to fill it with? The dreams have been spilling into my days. Each one feels longer. Every time I shut my eyes, the image of Laura crushed between two chunks of road cement is plastered across my lids, and we're falling. The cement grinding her down as the light from the sky far above turns into a pinpoint. We continue to fall in the darkness. I can hear her screaming right next to me as we drop for eons through the unending void. My moments of waking calm are diminished by the day, and I fear insanity is creeping up my shadow. A month out from the arrival of the sinkhole, something new and frightening happened. I had a waking nightmare. I was at the grocery store when all of the sudden, I was walking through downtown with Laura instead. She was smiling and happy, and the sun washed across her face like a painting. I didn't feel tired or anxious anymore. I felt like I'd just laid down in fresh sheets after a long day. I didn't even know where Laura was leading me. My eyes were locked on hers. Then I saw them, the black circles of her pupils, the sinkhole. And as if on cue, with my IDing of them, the sun overhead was gone. Rain droplets the size of golf balls were barraging the streets. Laura kept pulling me forward. Lightning streaked the sky in electric spider webs, and the thunder shook the earth, causing the road below us to ripple like a wave. The cement under Laura crumbled. I held her tight, but her grip slipped through mine, and she fell backwards. As Laura went over, she disappeared before she hit the darkness of the endless pit. I snapped back to reality from the waking nightmare, and realized I was at the West Valley and Jefferson intersection, and I was about to step over the edge. My 4-year-old son and I have a nighttime ritual. Step 1. Turn off his cartoons and pray he won't wail loud enough that the neighbors think I'm torturing him. Step 2. Sedate the wild beastie with the Goodnight Moon story. He'll be crawling all over the bed at the beginning, but I just keep reading slower and softer while I wait for him to wind down. Then, with barely a whisper, I'll say, "Good night, Mikey." "Good night, Mommy," he'll say back. The piece that comes afterward, it somehow completes the long day of communicating and work. It heals all the pacifying of clients, and writing reports, and running errands, and cooking and cleaning, and everything else that makes Atlas's job look easy. And listening to my boy's deep breathing, everything in the world will be right again. And I know I'd do it 1,000,000 times over, just for the sacred simplicity of the precious little time I have with him. That's how I thought it would go on forever, until a few nights ago when I whispered goodnight, and he replied, "Goodbye, Mommy." "You're supposed to say goodnight, silly," I said. "Goodbye means leaving, and I'm not going anywhere." "I know," he said. "I'll miss you, Mommy. Goodbye." He was asleep before I could respond again. I thought it was cute at the time. I didn't think for a second about waking him up and going through the process of settling down again. There was something about how deliberately he said it though that left me feeling unsettled. Just to be safe, I walked around the room and made sure his window was locked. I left the door open a crack like I always do to check in on him, kissed him one last time, and then left. I didn't hear a peep all night, but I still couldn't get any sleep. I kept getting this chill and waking up in a cold sweat. What if he said goodbye because someone said they'd take him away? Mikey's father didn't live with us. Long story. But he'd never shown any interest in his son before. It wasn't a rational fear that made me keep walking by his room at night. Once at 11 p.m., tucking his errant legs back under the covers. Again at 2 a.m., putting his stuffed dragon back under his arm. I finally got a few hours of sleep, until 7 a.m. rolled around way too fast. When it was time to get him ready for preschool, I entered his room and he was gone. My blurry eyes became lasers. The stuffed dragon was still there. He'd never go anywhere, not even the bathroom without it. Windows, doors, all locked from the inside. Closets, cabinets, pantries. I was on a rampage, tearing the place apart like I was a pillaging army. Screaming his name until I was hoarse. Pounding on my neighbors' doors and then finally calling the police. I was in tears by the time the officer came by to ask me a few questions. No, I don't know where he could have gone. No, I don't know why anyone would take him. No, no, no. Until finally, I mentioned that he said goodbye last night. Sounds like he ran away then, ma'am. I'll get this back to the station. In the meantime, take a drive around all his favorite parks, playgrounds, whatever is nearby. The whole day was hell, and the next morning was worse. I don't know if those haunted stretches of misplaced time can be considered sleep, but the first thing I did when I woke up was look into his room again. The vain hope that this had all been a nightmare flickered when I saw what was on his bed. A crude crayon drawing of a little blue blob, the color of his pajamas, writing something that looked like his stuffed dragon. Shaky block letters underneath said, "We playin'." The stuffed dragon was gone. It didn't mean anything though. I'd been tearing the room apart looking for him. and it would have been very easy for me to knock one of his drawings onto the bed. I'd probably taken the dragon when I was looking for him without even noticing. All the drawing did was send me into a fresh spiral of despair. The police hadn't turned up anything, and it wasn't until the next morning when I got my next clue. Another drawing was left on his bed. There was a taller figure here, and I assume it was supposed to be me, because underneath it said, "Where Mommy?" That was the longest day of my entire life. I patrolled the house a dozen times, even crawling through the heating ducts to see if he was still somewhere in the house. I picked up a security camera to watch his room, so I could catch whoever was leaving the drawings. After that, it was just a matter of waiting to see if tomorrow brought another. I'd intended on staying up all night to watch his room, but I'd run myself so ragged that I couldn't fend off a few hours of welcome oblivion. The cam footage was the first thing I thought about. It was Mikey walking into his bedroom in the same pajamas I'd seen him in last. The stuffed dragon clutched under his little arms. He didn't face the camera mounted above the door. He just went straight to his crayons in the corner and began drawing. I sat there mesmerized while he drew, 10 minutes at least before he got up and put the drawing on the bed. He broke the blue crayon while he colored, and sure enough, the blue was still broken on the floor where he'd left it. When he was finished, he finally faced the camera. It wasn't Mikey. That thing that looked at the camera. The thing wearing his pajamas and sitting in his bed. It didn't have a face, just smooth skin with slight contours where facial features should be, like latex pulled suffocatingly tight across the face. There wasn't a mouth, but I could still tell he was smiling from how the muscles pulled back when he looked at me. "I know you watchin'. I watchin' you too." That's what his drawing said, right next to a crude drawing of an eyeball. I'm insane, I decided. The stress, the worry, the sleepless nights. It's driving me insane. I didn't know who to show the video to. I didn't even know if they'd see the same thing I saw, or whether it was all in my head. I just lost it. I don't know how long I spent in that room. Sitting and rocking in the corner, hands clutching my knees to my chest. But before I knew it, it was dark again. I was so tired. I hadn't been to work in days. I don't even know if I still had a job. I couldn't help but think that if I had taken more time off to spend with Mikey, I could have deciphered his warning sooner and prevented all of this. Or that if he really did run away, then it was my fault, and I was living in a nightmare of my own creation. I guess I just fell asleep where I sat in the corner of his room. It was still dark when I woke up, but I was still so tired that I didn't open my eyes. I just sat there listening to the soft scratching for a long time, before I was finally alert enough to realize what it was. Crayons on paper. Mikey. I was awake in an instant, and holding in my scream took more willpower than I knew I had. He was sitting on his bed, his back towards me. Scratch, scratch, scratching away with the crayons, humming something. The gentle melodic rise and fall of the sing-song voice I used when reading Goodnight Moon. I stood up as quickly as I could, but he must have heard me because he put his crayon down. "Mikey?" I whispered, still terrified that I had gone completely insane. The boy climbed down from the bed, his back still facing me. "Where did you go, Mikey? Why did you say goodbye to Mommy?" "Mommy's too busy. Mommy doesn't care." It was his voice, his soft, pure little voice. And he was talking, so he had a mouth. I was in tears as I rushed towards him, but he didn't even react when I gave him a hug. "Mommy doesn't care. I'm so glad you're back, Mikey. You have no idea how much I've missed." I didn't see it until I was already holding him. Now, his lack of a face was all I could see. "I do know. I told you I've been watching you too." It wasn't a mouth he was speaking from. Not exactly. The slit started at the top of his neck and ran vertically to where his nose should have been. It opened and closed with the motions a mouth might make, but it was a gaping wound that he was speaking out of. Each time it closed, a sucking gurgle reverberated from it. I let go, but he didn't. He was latched around my hand, dragging me into the wound which closed around my fingers. I didn't realize how fragile that little body was until I pulled free and the wound tore even wider, all the way up his face. He didn't stop though, leaping at me, climbing me, grabbing my other hand to shove it deep into the wound. I tore free, this time ripping him all the way down to his stomach before I could get him off me. He was insatiable. I had to throw him against the wall before I was able to escape. I slammed the door behind me and put my back against it, alternating between heaving sobs and tense, breathless pauses while I listened inside. "Goodbye, Mommy," was all I heard. I held the door shut while I called the police, although I didn't feel any pressure or hint of presence from the other side. It took them 10 minutes to arrive, and by the time I opened the door to Mikey's room again, the boy was gone. The security footage. I ran to my computer in the other room and pulled it up while they waited. Patient, polite, and utterly unconvinced. I clicked on empty file after empty file. Everything black and inscrutable from tonight. Next, I looked for last night's footage, but it was completely gone. I didn't go back into Mikey's room until after the police had gone, and even then I crept like I was a thief in my own house. That's when I noticed the blue crayon smeared all over the lens of the camera. There wasn't any sign of him left, not even the blood from the sourceless flapping wound. What I did find though, a fresh drawing, kid-like, and innocent despite all the red. It looked like me again, but there was a big Pac-Man-like thing that was about to eat me up. Underneath it, "Fun, Mommy. Play again tomorrow night." I hate thinking about how many chances I've had to play, all wasted because I was too busy or too tired, or too distracted by everything that didn't matter in life. I miss him so much. I think I'm looking forward to tonight, even if he isn't the same as I remember. Even if I have to blindfold myself so I don't have to look at what he's become. I'm going to sit down and draw with him, and maybe, if I'm very, very lucky, then he's going to understand how hard I'm trying, and still be there when the morning comes. I've been with my husband for the better part of 20 years. We dated for 10 of those and have been married for 8. 2 children accompanying us along the way. I still remember when we met on a field trip during high school to a zoo which sat outside of our city. He walked around with me for the entirety of the trip as we watched the silly monkeys swing from branch to branch, and we laughed at the elephant taking a 5-minute pee right in front of us. I recall how beautiful the cotton candy skies of pinks and blues swirled around our heads on the bus ride home. It was perfect, much like the past 18 years had been. My husband never gave me any reason to be suspicious of him, whether that be cheating or something more sinister. No, as I said, the life we had built together was, for the most part, perfect. Of course, it wasn't without usual relationship problems, like arguing and the occasional disagreements, but we always made it though. Outside of bickering about who had to take the trash out, or why the electric bill got paid a day late, we'd never had a major test of our relationship, at least, not until recently, that is. It was just another average day, a warm spring Wednesday, when I noticed the first cracks in my reality. I almost wish I hadn't pulled out the old family pictures to reminisce, to take a stroll down memory lane. Even if my life, my children, and my relationship were a lie, I still enjoyed every second of it. I was sitting at the kitchen table, golden rays of sunlight pouring in from the garden window as they covered us in a blanket of warmth. I sifted through the pictures we'd taken from the Polaroid camera which sat somewhere tucked away in the house. My youngest daughter Vera sat next to me as she rummaged through the cardboard box labeled memories, passing me the stacks of pictures we'd accumulated over the years. "Sheesh, Mommy, you used to be so skinny." Kids never fail to give you their most honest opinion, even if it's a little too truthful. I giggled, trying my best to conceal my distaste for her comment. Yeah, I replied, rolling my eyes and sticking my tongue out at her. She laughed. As I flipped through the stack of pictures, most of them being random pictures of our old dog, Ranger, I came across one of my husband Sam and I leaning against an old fence. His long black hair cascaded over his shoulders in a curly mess. His arm was slung over my shoulder, a big grin on both of our faces. We were so young. The front door squealed open as heavy boots pounded the floor on their way in. It was Sam. His clothes were flecked with dirt and doused with oil from another hard day at the auto body shop. His blonde hair was matted down like a pile of greasy straw. That's when I noticed it for the first time. I looked down at the picture and up at him several times. The man who stood in front of me wasn't the one in the picture. It felt like the air had been violently torn from my lungs. If I could have screamed, I would have. Sam must have noticed my shocked reaction. He seemed to tense up before snatching the picture from my hands. "What are you looking at these for?" he said, his brow furrowed. Hell, even the shape of his nose and eyebrows seemed completely off. I want to cry. "I just wanted to look at some old pictures," I finally croaked out, tripping over my words along the way. Whoever the man that stood before me was, I didn't want him to see my worry, my anxiety over catching him. How had I not noticed this before? The man gave me an odd look before looking down at the picture I was still clutching in my hands. His furrowed brow eased into a surprised expression, his eyes turning big like silver dollars. "Wow, we have changed a lot, babe." He awkwardly laughed before continuing. "I'm going to hit the shower. I'm all sorts of gross." He quickly shuffled out of the kitchen and to the bathroom down the hall. My mind began racing. Who is this man in my home? What happened to the real Sam? How did I not notice this before? All these questions swirled around my brain and converged at the center, creating a mess of thoughts I couldn't sort out. I brought my shaking hands upward, studying the image once more. Everything was wrong. Sam had long, black, curly hair which hung past his shoulders, a long nose which turned up at the end, and thick, black eyebrows. His eyes were big and brown, piercing through me even in the old picture. The man in the kitchen had medium-length blonde hair, a large wide nose, and light, almost transparent eyebrows. Perhaps the most obvious difference of them all was his bright blue eyes. The man also wore a beard, which was thick and full, darker than the rest of the hair on his face and head. There's no way that could be Sam. No one just changes like that. Even if they could, it doesn't explain his eyes changing into a completely different color. I began sifting through more photos. The next picture I found was of us a few years later, sitting around a fire and talking to my parents. Sam's hair looked different, like it was still long and black, but this time it was straight. I continued my search for more pictures, adamant to prove that the man in my house wasn't my husband. After a couple of minutes, I managed to find another picture of Sam, by himself this time, sitting in a lawn chair in our front yard drinking a beer. Two things were odd about this. Sam had always been, as far as I can remember, strictly against drinking alcohol. Secondly, his hair in this picture was shorter, a dark brown color and straight. Perhaps the most chilling thing, however, were his eyes. Instead of the deep brown color they had been in the earlier images, they appeared to be a dark green in this one. The last picture I found was one of Sam and our oldest daughter, Tara, standing in front of a Christmas tree in our living room. This particular one seemed to be just from a few years ago. Tara was no more than 8 in this picture. Sam stood, or rather stooped, with his arm over Tara's shoulder. They were both smiling. Sam in this picture had even shorter, lighter hair. His eyes were now the same color blue that the man in the kitchen had. I compared the first picture to this one, noting the distinct changes in facial structure between the two. I feel like I'm losing my mind. "Are you okay?" Vera said, which made me jump. I looked down at the little girl whose eyes were like saucers. I must have looked crazy rummaging through the memory box and wildly shifting through its contents. Yeah, I'm alright, honey. Just wanted to look at as many as I could before I start dinner," I replied, smiling weakly at my daughter. The shower stopped, leaving a deafening silence over the rest of the house. My heart pounded as I gathered the pictures and shoved them into my pocket. "Will you clean this up and put them away, please?" I instructed Vera, who sighed and groaned in response. "If you do, I'll let you have an ice cream sandwich after dinner." She seemed to perk up after hearing this, as she haphazardly stacked the photos and tossed them back into the box. I was uneasy for the rest of the night, stiffening up every time the strange man would walk by me, or pull me in for a hug or a kiss. I tried my best to hide my disgust, my fear for whoever this was in our house. The most unnerving thing was watching him interact with my daughters, though they didn't seem to notice anything off. Dinner went by without a hitch. However, it wasn't without awkwardness on my behalf. Everything and everyone else seemed fine. The kids were happy and the man seemed nice enough. He knew the kids' names and other things only my husband could know. Maybe it was Sam. Maybe I'm just overreacting. I just don't understand how someone could change so much. The night settled in as darkness consumed the house. Bedtime. I stood in the bathroom, doused my face in cold water, preparing to sleep in bed with the strange man. I decided it was best to study the pictures further tomorrow, after he left for work. I didn't want him to find out that I knew. I walked, shuffled, stiffly to the door of our bathroom, nervous to open it. The door swung open before I could touch the handle. "Oh, hey," the man said, scratching the back of his head. "I gotta use the bathroom, you mind?" He stepped past me and shot me a look that indicated I should leave, so I did. I jogged as lightly as I could around the bed and hopped under the covers on my side. I looked under my pillow where I hid the pictures when Sam wasn't around, and made sure they were secure in their place. Turning the TV on, I flipped through the channels in an attempt to calm myself down. The door to the bathroom creaked open, and out walked the man. He lazily threw himself onto the other side of the bed, groaning as he did so. If this wasn't my husband, he sure acted comfortable being in the same bed with me. He slid his hands down his pants and scratched his crotch before letting out a monstrous belch. "Sorry," he giggled. "What's up with you tonight?" he said, turning his gaze to me. I looked everywhere else but his eyes, feeling my face begin to burn as I tried to come up with a lie that would satisfy him. "I'm fine, why do you ask?" I managed to get out. The longer I spent around the stranger, the more I wondered how I hadn't noticed this sooner. The more I thought back, trying to recall how long he'd been here, or if this was Sam, how long he'd looked like this, the foggier my memory seemed to get. Unease coursed through my veins. "Oh, well, you've just been distant tonight," he said, his eyes turning to the television. We watched a movie for a while before he finally drifted to sleep. My adrenaline pumping kept me awake through the rest of the night. I swear I could see him watching me from the corner of my eyes while he watched TV. The night dragged along for eternity. Sometimes I'd watch Sam as he snored in a deep sleep, or I'd turn the TV back on and watch another episode of my favorite series. Eventually, the glimmer of morning sunlight began peeking in through the blinds. I was the first one out of bed that morning, obviously. I made my way to the kitchen and began preparing breakfast, hopeful to get the man out of our house as soon as I could. I had to get answers. After an hour or so of sitting at the kitchen table, sipping on a cup of coffee, Sam walked into the kitchen already dressed in his work outfit. "Hey babe, I got a call from work and I gotta leave a little early," he said before kissing my cheek and swiftly walking out of the house. It was like he could read my mind, knowing how badly I wanted him out of the house. I took little time to return to the bedroom, eager to return to my investigation. I spent most of the morning studying those pictures, trying my best to piece it all together. The girls didn't wake up until just before noon, sleeping in as much as possible before spring break ended. By the time they emerged from their bedroom, I had already brought out the entire box of pictures, hoping I could add more to the timeline. Instead, I was shocked even further to find out that my daughters had changed as well. Am I going crazy? Tara walked lethargically into the kitchen, her feet falling like cinder blocks as she went. She'd just recently started drinking coffee, pouring some of the aromatic substance into her cup, before sitting across from me at the table. That's when I noticed. The image I had in front of me was of Tara from just a couple of years ago. Her hair was almost platinum blonde and wavy, accompanied by a pair of hazel eyes. The girl sitting across from me had deep red hair and dark brown eyes. Her entire facial structure seemed altered as well. Her long, thin nose now appeared wider and more upturned. I feel like my entire world is crumbling around me. I squeezed my eyes shut. A ball of emotion had materialized in my throat, and no matter how hard I tried to swallow, it wouldn't go down. I folded my hands and bit down on the knuckle, trying my best to starve off the eventual panic attack that was ensuing. "It'll be alright, Mom," Tara said. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words were caught in my throat. How did she know? I peered up at the girl and found her smiling coyly. The steam from the mug of coffee distorted her face. "I need to use the bathroom," I said before abruptly standing up from my chair. I threw all of the pictures back into the box and shoved it across the table. My outburst didn't seem to faze Tara in the slightest. The next couple of hours were a blur. I don't really recall much after my interaction with Tara in the kitchen, my sane mind giving way to the worst panic attack I've ever experienced in my life. Questions. Questions which no sane person should ever have, swirled around my mind. Are these people really my family? Is it possible for someone to shapeshift? Either way, I had to make a plan soon. Sam would be home at any moment. I sat in a space between the wall and the toilet, trying my best to calm my nerves. I'll gather my things tomorrow when Sam is gone, and leave when the girls aren't around, I thought. That seemed to be the best course of action, the only one. Even if I was losing my mind, I had to get away from the source of it. There's just no way these people are my family. I cautiously sat up from my spot on the floor and quietly walked over to the door. I held my breath, afraid that making even the faintest noise would result in my sudden death. I had no reason to feel this way, but I just did. I reached for the doorknob, counting to 3 in my head. 1, 2, 3. Small knocks emanated from the other side of the door. My entire body went stiff. My blood ran cold. My hand instinctively recoiled from the doorway as I stepped backwards. Finally, the silence was broken. "Honey, Tara's telling me that you don't feel well." The sympathetic yet stern voice called out to me. It was the man masquerading as my husband. I remained still, silent. "Please come out. I just want to talk to you." "No one's upset." He beckoned to me. I wish I would have stayed held up in the bathroom. Hell, even calling the police and getting admitted would have been a preferable alternative to what happened after I finally gave in to his pleas. The rest of that afternoon and into the evening went by as normally as it could have. I sat at the kitchen table while my husband prepared dinner. The girls played quietly, remarkably quietly, in the living room close by. I got up from my spot at the table and peered out the garden window, watching a pair of doves fly in circles playing with one another. I wished so badly that I could be one of those birds, so that I could fly freely away from this place. I feel trapped, as though they would stop me if I attempted to escape. I turned away from the window, from the beautiful creatures which played amongst the newly green trees, to find these people in my home staring at me. The hamburger which sizzled and popped over the flame on the stove was the only thing staving off the silence. The man watched me, studied me, with wide eyes as I folded my arms and backed away. I peered into the living room to find the girls doing the same, their toys cast aside as they stood and stared holes into me, with cold dead eyes. "I was just looking out the window. Is everything okay?" I stammered, stumbling over my words. They soon returned to what they were doing before, as if their behavior wasn't completely bizarre. I'm stuck between the anxiety of being the one in the wrong, stressing that if I've truly lost my mind, and am now throwing it in the faces of my perfectly normal family, who's trying to help me stay sane. On the other hand, I can't help but feel that my life is in danger, that these people around me aren't who they seem to be. The small primal piece in the deepest part of my brain screaming at me to run away. I walked to the kitchen sink, pouring a glass of water to help soothe my heavy chest and rapid heartbeat. That did little to calm me. "Dinner is ready," Sam said sternly, emphasizing every syllable in his words. I turned quickly to find my entire family sitting at the table, their faces contorted and marred with anger. I'm not sure if I was just lost in my own little world at this point, but I swear I didn't hear a single footstep or noise as they all gathered for dinner, which is highly unusual considering these people are usually very loud. The rest of the night went on similarly to this. Small, nearly indescribable oddities showing themselves in the form of my family's weird behavior. Sometimes I'd catch them watching me. All of them just watching me, studying me as though I were a lab rat or something. It was deeply unsettling. Finally, the most dreadful time of them all was upon me. Bedtime. I felt a growing sense of sickness take a hold of me as the idea of sharing a bed with that man was nearly unimaginable. I feel as though my life is at stake. If I don't play along with these wicked games, that something bad will happen. I crawled underneath the covers and laid on my side, away from my husband. I curled my body as tightly into a ball as I could, wishing that I could simply vanish from existence. God would not afford me such a liberty. Sam laid stiffly next to me. He had watched me very carefully with each step I took into the bedroom. I'd been laying there in the fetal position for about a half an hour before the silence was finally broken. "You're so stupid, you know that?" he said. The hate in his voice cut through the air like a knife. My heart started pounding once more. I could hardly breathe. "It took you a long time, Cindy." "A long time," he laughed, a wheeze of air escaping his throat before continuing. "I didn't think it would take you this long to notice. 18 human years." He clicked his tongue in dissatisfaction, in disappointment at my ignorance. I felt like I had gone into shock, my voice finally returning to me after a few minutes of silence. "What do you mean?" I whimpered. I could feel the weight in the bed shift as he sat up, and even with my back to him, I could still feel his eyes scanning over me. "You and I both know what I mean. You've finally got it. You caught on. Now you know the truth. Or some of it," he replied. My blood ran cold like ice at the last thing he said. "What do you mean, some of it? Where's the real Sam?" I cried out, clenching my eyes shut and gritting my teeth. "I am the real Sam. It can be hard to maintain an appearance over a prolonged amount of time for our species." I couldn't believe what the man was saying to me. "You know, I can be anything you want me to be. Anything." I felt sick from his poisonous words, which were becoming more distorted and robotic the longer he spoke. I could feel a distinct wetness brush up against my arm. I jerked my arm away, but it was no use. What felt like a slimy tentacle had wrapped itself around my bicep and held me firmly in place. I opened my mouth and tried to scream, only for a massive dark hand to clamp tightly over my mouth. "Shh, it's going to be okay, baby," the creature said. Its voice was ragged and harsh. Waves of its foul breath invading my nostrils nearly caused me to vomit. "I'm going to give you one more chance. Either start acting right, or I'll make you act right." Its grip on my arm and mouth eased as I brushed them away, trying to catch my breath. I turned my attention to the side of the bed the creature was on, but nothing. It wasn't there. "I'm up here, honey," it bellowed, causing me to jump and peer up at the ceiling. The creature's arms and legs extended to the corners of the bedroom, like a massive daddy-long-legged spider. Its body twisted and knotted, the knobs of its spinal cord protruding from its pale flesh. Various parts of its back and stomach pulsated angrily, as though it could explode at any moment. The worst part was its head, which was twisted backward, revealing the face of Sam as I had first met him. "I can be anything, even your worst nightmare," it gargled out. Globs of thick spit and fragments of teeth fell from its mouth down onto me. The disgusting bile which poured onto my skin burnt horribly, causing me to roll out of bed and onto the floor. I bolted for the door, pumping my legs as quickly as I could. I flung the door open, causing it to crash violently against the wall, before my journey came to a sudden halt. Outside of my bedroom stood our two girls, looking up at me with huge, black chasms where their eyes should have been. A putrid green substance trickled freely from the exposed sockets of their eyeballs. I gagged and pushed forward, shoving the two out of my way. The front door was just a couple feet away, my one-way ticket to freedom. When I emerged into the outdoors, I was met with a cool drizzle which fell from the black sky. I ran for what felt like hours, like days, before I finally collapsed from exhaustion. The last thing I remember was how badly my lungs burnt, and the putrid smell which clung to the inside of my nostrils. The events that I've just detailed for all of you happened over the course of 2 days, about a week and a half ago. I was discovered by a squad car about 3 miles outside of the house I had fled. After a couple of hours of questioning, they decided it was best to send me to the psychiatric ward in a larger city, neighboring ours. Obviously, telling the officers about my husband turned spider demon wasn't the best reason for why I was lying in a ditch off the side of the highway. Either way, I'd rather be labeled as a delusional psychopath, rather than go back to the hellhole I had escaped. That brings us to the events which transpired this morning. I was lying in a bed. I've got my own room here, when the doctor politely knocked on the door before entering. He quickly stepped over to the computer which sat next to a bunch of other machines I wasn't quite sure of. "Well, miss, I have some good news and some bad news," he said, turning to me. He was wearing a mask which obscured his face, but his blue eyes seemed haunting, piercing into me. "What's that?" I said quietly. "Well, Sydney, the good news is you're definitely sound of mind. However," he removed his mask, revealing the horrors which had lurked beneath it. "The bad news, for you at least, is that you'll be coming back home with me tonight."